My family runs a summer camp in eastern Massachusetts. I started planting trees here my sophomore year in college, and today I'm going to work through some of the successes and some of the mistakes I've made. Here we go. I started by planting 50 black walnut trees. This one's doing pretty well, but it's avoiding a hemlock, so it's bending towards the light. Highest and best use might be bowls in the future, but it's never going to be a saw log. These are 7 dwarf peach trees right out in front of my parents' house and the arts and crafts building. We used to have raspberries here, but they didn't produce anything, so we seeded this to an understory of clover, and the raspberries still come up, so we just yank those out. Turning the camera here, this is a 6-year-old black locust tree. Started it from seed in my dorm room during undergrad. This is a 3-foot high keyhole garden raised bed that I built for my mom. She plants tomatoes in it most years. The idea was to have it be a hoop house, but it's a little difficult to put the plastic on and off because it gets really hot, and we haven't installed fans in it yet, so the tomatoes just grow out the side. What we call the back parking lot area is really hot, but it's not too far above the water table. So I planted wet-loving species, wet-tolerant species, honey locust, balsam fir, and then some curly poplar right here. That's the small tree. These are about 6 years old. I started these from seed the same year I started the black locust. It still has raspberries growing in it that the campers and counselors eat. In the understory here, my mom grows zucchini most years. We have a lot of grass here, sports fields, so all summer long, not every day, but many days we hear from the noise of the mower. So I grew up not really loving all things mowed. That initially sparked the idea, all right, let's just plant trees everywhere. I can't tell you how many of my trees got mowed down because I either didn't mark them well enough or they were in a place that was poised to be mowed. So these are 2 straight lines of trees, silver maple and curly poplar, which is definitely much more conducive to mowing. This is another black walnut next to the mini golf course and the ceramic deer from 1970. Got blackberries. They're not ripe yet, but they will be soon. My grandparents started the camp in 1957. It's going on 61 summers, and these are some evergreens that my mom planted around the time I was born, so 28 years ago. Trees grow. This is a south-facing rock ledge on which the dance studio sits and overlooks the sports fields. It's definitely my favorite place on camp. It gets full winter sun, and there's a chestnut right over there. Back behind the dance studio begins some of the oldest forest on camp. It's about 120 years since it was farmland. We have rows of chestnuts, apples, and Aroniaberry here. I did a lot of work in this area clearing younger white pine and hemlock because we have a whole lot of wood trees for timber if we want that, and it was a good spot to add in other fruit and nut trees. Back in the forest here, we've marked the trees for prescribed thinning. The lines mean that those ones have potential saw log value in the future, and the ones on the ground that had just blue dots on them mean that they're better served on the ground as detritus, so decomposing organic matter to let the oak regeneration happen. So getting rid of the kind of gnarly, low-value pines and hemlocks and letting the white, red oak, and beech take over the canopy. A large number of the big old white pine trees we just leave for their beauty and their ecosystem services. These are old white pine trees that were thinned a while ago. They're doing their job decomposing on the ground. They actually provide better wildlife habitat if you leave them standing up. So if you just girdle them and kill them, but leave them as a standing dead tree. But since we have hundreds of campers that pass through, we have to make the woods safe, so we leave them on the ground to decompose. So this is actually a really good example of what we're trying to have happen. Every year I spend about a week in the woods with a chainsaw, just thinning it out, because the regrowth has been really dense. So these are white pine logs that I've left on the ground just to open up the canopy and let this sun in. And right over here is a white oak that now has the chance to grow up and produce acorns for the deer and the squirrel. Within the forest and around its perimeter are many acres of wetland, probably 50 or so. And growing up next to that and within this forest was it became a huge influence on why old forest biodiversity, bringing kind of low levels of ecological succession to a higher expression of what they can be, why all of that is just so important in this climate. Just this forest duff layer and the that's good. The fungi that runs throughout it, and then just this carbon cycling machine that provides oxygen. Bit of a ramble, but it's pretty good. These are my favorite old oak trees. The forester said they could be 200 years old or so. Pretty big. This is another acre of forest that we chose to thin the small diameter white pines out of. They're laid on the ground as detritus or detritus. People say that word in different ways. They're becoming soil. On these lines, which are actually on key line, believe it or not, within the forest, that was an interesting endeavor. We've planted cherry trees. So all these are Montmorency sour cherries within the woods. We're thinning out more of the red maple for firewood as the years go on, and then what that's going to allow for is these cherry trees to get a little bit more sun and take over a shorter but more fruitful canopy. Here's a cherry here. It's getting partial sun. And this is our deer deterrent. It's a bar of Irish Spring soap hung in cheesecloth with a paper clip. And the scent is something that the deer detest. Out of the woods here and along the driveway, we have a straight row of Montmorency cherry, and some of the interplanted trees are either redbud or serviceberry. All the groups of trees are planted according to when they fruit. So this is the cherry, so late June, early July section. There's some peaches over here, and then all of the apples and pears are down near the barn. So if we think back to those black walnuts, this is the largest one. It's outside my aunt's house. A little bit too close to it is this hybrid chestnut, and up the fence over here we have hardy kiwi growing, so the kids can play tennis and eat kiwi if they're here in August. This is a really interesting illustration of a black locust and a honey locust that are the same age. The advantage of the honey locusts is that they grow in wet places. The black locust takes off in well-drained sand. This is one of about 12 Asian pears up near the barn. We use rolled window screen as a rodent guard. You need the aluminum stuff and not the fiberglass stuff. So you get a roll of it at Home Depot, use tin snips to cut it, and then roll it up with leather gloves on so it doesn't poke holes in your hands, and then just wrap it around the base of the tree. As I mentioned before, everything around the barn fruits in September, October, so here's another chestnut, and we had sheep and Angora goats in here growing up, and now we've planted elderberry. We've got a fruiting Asian pear here. a few concluding thoughts in front of this big old oak tree.